I used to think there were two Persian empires before Islam, the Achaemenid and Sasanian empires. But my guest scholar in this episode disagrees because he believes the designation of Sasanians as being the second Persian empire is largely a 19th century British invention. Also, contrary to other scholars, he doesn't think that Hellenism was a foreign element in the Middle East. As he explains it, this thinking came only after Europeans defined the Greeks as their ancestors. He tells us about the Iranian national identity in modern times and in ancient times, and why Persia's name was changed in the 20th century. Welcome to Unraveling the Middle East. I'm Adel Ali, your host. Please join me and my guest, Dr. Khodadad Rezakhani, as we unravel the Middle East. Dr. Rezakhani, it is a pleasure to have you on our program. Thank you for taking the time for this conversation with me. Let's start our conversation with some fundamentals here because I think they're very important to our audience. We often hear the terms Persian and Iranian used interchangeably. So are they interchangeable?
Well, in some senses, yes, and in some senses, no. Generally, Persian would refer to something that you would put under the umbrella of Iranian, but from a certain, let's say, modern point of view. Historically, though, the two terms have been used as a sort of equivalent for each other, but as exonyms and endonyms. So you would see, for example, all Greco-Roman sources refer to the people of this area as Persians. Various versions of the word in Greek and Latin. In Arabic sources, the word Furs as the plural of Fars is used, and in Chinese sources, the word Puso, which is coming from Persian again, is used to refer to this to the people. But then internally, the word that is used as a collective is often something that comes from a root of Aer, the ancient Indo-Iranian or Indo-Iranian word of Aer, and its derivatives, of which Iran is a plural, really. So Iran is Iran, is from Middle Persian Iran, which means the air people, the heirs, really. So internally, we don't have the use of the word, any derivative of the word Persian or Pars, really as a marker of the entirety. But it is used in an external sense, and it is quite widespread. I give you a quick example of it. There is a section in Ibn Nadim, the early, the early Islamic 10th century Islamic bibliographer, in which he's talking about various languages of what he calls the people of Furs, meaning everything. And he mentions the language of Pahlav and the language of Dari, and then under that Furs, he again says Furs, and here he specifies that he means the language or the dialect of the province of Fars to the south of Iran, and so on and so forth. So this Persian externally does have a use as a collective. It is a bit comparable, let's say, to the way Germans use the word Deutsch in German to describe themselves. But externally, obviously, the words derived from certain tribes of Germans, which is Germanii or Almanii in French and a lot of other languages, is used for that. So it's a matter of exonyms and endonyms.
So since you use Germany as an example, Dr. Rezakhani, would the term Persia be comparable to Prussia in Germany, as in a certain ethnicity or people within a specific geography?
Yes, in a sense, except nobody calls Germans Prussians. That's why I use.
They don't anymore, but they did a century and a half ago, right? The Prussian Empire.
But that was a specific part of Germany. See, as a collective,
that's true.
You have the word German from Germany, from a tribe of ancient Germans who were in touch with the Romans, or you have the word Aleman, the French word used Alman, which comes from the Alemanni, which are the southwestern tribe of the Germans that the French bordered. So probably a better example is the Greek word for Greece, which is comes from the root of Hellas and Eleni, which means Greeks in Greek. That's where the word Hellenistic comes from. But of course, externally, Greece is used in the West for Magna Graecia, and in the East we use words derived from Ionia, so Yunan, Stan, these words which come from Ionia. So it's a matter of external and internal. Specifically speaking, Persia is a section in the south of Iran, and Persian is one of the Iranian languages, which we can then talk about.
So did the term Persia stuck after the first Persian Empire that was founded by Cyrus the Great? Is that how that happened? Because he was of Persian tribe? Him
being of a Persian tribe, yes, generally. The thing is, they are referred to as the kings of the Persians in Greek sources.
Yeah.
See, they are not necessarily referred to as the king of Persia. They're referred to as the king of the Persians. And they themselves, so for example, Darius says, I am Darius, a Persian, right? So he describes this as an ethnonym more than as an actual place. But then the area that these Persians live in, or Persians control often, then gets to be called Persia by extension from Persian. But the original name is actually, it's an ethnonym. It's referring to the people, not a geography.
So is the term Iran broader than the term Persia?
The term Iran, in a sense, is broader. Yes, in a sense, is describing a broader geography. But then, things always get thorny, because then we have this other terminology that we are really now in the rise, we really are sort of in a period of its growth, is the Persianate world, which is what we are using for really the Timurid and post-Timurid Central and West Asia. And this Persianate world then includes the world of Mughal India, Safavid Iran, and Ottoman Turkey and Eastern Europe. So then, in a sense, you have the use of a Persia-derived word for a wider thing. But generally, we should really discuss this issue of the origins of the study of ancient Iran and where we get to this idea of what is Iranian and the Iranian family of languages, and the problem that we are applying a lot of this knowledge that we have from modern scholarship to our historical understanding. As a historian, I try to avoid that. People 2,000 years ago weren't necessarily aware of the fact that Sogdian and Scythian are from the same family of languages as Persian is. They would understand that Persian and Parthian are mutually understandable. But, people weren't philologists back then. They wouldn't know that these are the family of languages. But we do know this. And then we tend to apply these bigger terms taken from our modern knowledge back into history. So really the answer to the question is factually, yes. Persian is a subset of Iranian. But whether historically it was really so
relevant,
clearly divided, relevant, people even cared about it that much, is a matter of debate.
Okay. I'm glad you gave the example of Scythians. I have read about this, and I just want to make sure I understand this correctly. So indulge me in this, please. I've read that Scythians, who at one point covered much of what is modern Ukraine now, were Iranian or Iranic peoples. Is that correct?
In the sense that they spoke an Iranic language, an Iranian language, yes, in that sense. And their descendants still live in that area, and they still speak an Iranian language. So yes.
But at that time, the Iranians that lived in the Iranian plateau had, going back to what you were saying, historical, they shared no relevance or kinship with those that live in all the way north of the Baltic Sea. I'm sorry, the Black Sea.
The
right?
Black Sea. Not anything that they were probably aware of.
Yeah.
But one might have not been that strangers to them. But nobody would be sitting in, I don't know, Pasargadae in Persia and claim that the king of the Sakas. And by the way, those are only one tribe of the Sakas who are in the northern Black Sea. You have to notice that Sakas are a lot more widespread than.
Yeah, I've seen it on a map. Yeah, very widespread.
It doesn't mean, no, they didn't necessarily feel a kinship. It's, again, our modern derivation that we know.
I see.
They spoke an Iranian language.
Fast forwarding to modern times, let me ask it this way. My parents were born in Tabriz, Azerbaijan. They speak Azeri Turkish, and they're Iranian, well, Iranian American now. So is my background Persian or Iranian?
Very good question.
I could even ask this, if I may just ask another one. Mahsa Amini, who was murdered in September, was Kurdish Iranian. So was she Persian or was she Iranian?
See, we go back to the original question.
Yeah.
Depends on what you want to identify yourself as now, right? It is, again, let's bring the German question. Okay, there is this issue. Up to 1925-6, the land is called, internationally, is called Persia, right?
1926.
26, right?
Yes.
So less than 100 years ago, if you stop somebody in the street and said, what is this thing? They would have called it, if they weren't from that land, they would have called it Persia, right? So in a sense, it is like Germans. What happened in 1926? Reza Shah told the rest of the world, hey, we don't call this land Persia, we call it Iran. So you guys call it Iran as well, right?
And Reza Shah was the founder of the last Iranian dynasty.
Last Iranian monarchical dynasty. So
yes.
The Pahlavi dynasty, right? So he comes and says that you have to use our native term for the country. Right? It would be a bit like Germans coming and saying, hey, you have to call our country Deutschland. You should stop using Allemand and Tedesco and German, all of these words that you other people use, and call our country the way we call them, right?
Actually, Erdogan is doing that now. He's telling the world to call Turkey, Turkiye.
But that's actually a different. The reason I still like the German idea is because, specifically speaking, Germans were a tribe of the Deutsch people. Right, the Deutsch people.
I see, which is different than the Turkey example I gave. Yes, I follow.
Deutsch people. Deutsch is this greater. This is the same word as Teutons. The Teutonic people.
Yes.
So these Teutonic people included Germans, right? Now the question would be, in that sense, then, would somebody who is a Saxon, well, in Germany today, the difference doesn't exist, but imagine it exists. Imagine the idea of Saxons and the Mecklenburgers and the Thuringia and the Bavarians, and all of these people actually existed.
Yeah.
So would you call a Bavarian or a Saxon or a Thuringia a German, or are they Deutsch? Because they don't belong to the tribe of Germanii, they belong to the nation of Teutonic people. But if 100 years ago, the Kurds of Iran were called Persian Kurds. The Turkish speakers of Iran were called Persian Turks to distinguish them from Ottoman Turks, from Ottoman Kurds, right? The Baluchis were called Persian Baluch. And this sticks, in a sense. Right now, I would say you are an Iranian Turk. You are an Iranian Azeri, to distinguish you from a Republic of Azerbaijan Azeri.
Of course,
right? Right. And it becomes interesting for me because my own stepfather, not my biological father, but the person I grew up with and consider my father, his family were from Ganja in the Republic of Azerbaijan. They moved to Iran And then he was actually born in Burujerd, which is in Lorestan, which is a very nicely mixed background in that sense. What in this, I would say his family, part of them were actually Republic of Azerbaijan Azeri, but he was Iranian Azeri, right? Like this is how you would say. I would say you are an Iranian Azeri, but if somebody calls you Persian Azeri, now it is becoming more and more as if this. I have argued this before. I have written an article called Persocentrism and the Iranian National Identity of this.
Persocentrism? Okay.
Persocentrism and the Iranian National Identity. It's online.
Okay.
It's the idea, but this seems to then suggest, now if you say Persian Kurd, is as if you are suggesting that there is this Persian overlordship, or at least being understood. My argument in that thing was there is no Persian ethnicity. Nobody calls themselves in Iran Persian, right? There are people who speak Persian and are from Isfahan. There's people who speak Persian and are from Tehran. There are people who speak Persian and are from Kerman, but nobody calls themselves Persian. Like
that's true.
Like, this is not what they say, right? Yeah. So this idea of there is no central majority. That's why I'm against the term minority, use of the word minority, because who is the majority? It's assuming that there is a majority. There is no majority, right? Majority, and it becomes often linguistic. That's the problem, that we take language as the only marker of identity, and we ignore the fact that, well, after all, I, as a Tehrani, have a lot more to share with the Mazandaranis in every sense of the word, right? In what I eat, in how I behave, in even the dialect I speak, and I have a lot to share with the Mazandaranis. Why am I necessarily connected to the Kermani, right? Because we speak the same language? No, not necessarily.
We could have a whole podcast of just talk about that, maybe more than one. You teach courses on this. We talked about Iran, Iranians, and Persians. I would be committing podcasting malpractice if I didn't ask you about the Persian New Year that's just coming up in a few days. As a point of interest, first, what year is it? That itself is a point of contention sometimes. It brings up a lot of interesting stuff. And two, when did it start? The Persian New Year, the celebration.
Oh, see, there I would say don't call it the Persian New Year.
Okay, go ahead.
I would say the Iranian New Year.
Interesting.
Because there, if in the modern sense we're considering Iran this wider terminology, that doesn't have to do with the country necessarily, but rather with the entire cultural extent. The celebration is actually celebrated in many parts of the world outside the borders of Iran, and it certainly is not Persian in the sense of it has never been connected necessarily to the Persian rituals in the sense of the specific southern Persia, I mean in the sense of Fars.
The province.
The rituals they're doing are very widespread. It's the year 1402, based on the Hijra calendar.
The Islamic calendar.
The Islamic calendar. I don't have a problem with it, because in general, the way we counted years was based on the years of the rule of the kings, right? So before Islam, you don't really have a continuous calendar. You have the year 32 of Khosrow II. Right, that's how things are counted. A bit like the Chinese.
And then it would start again with the next monarch.
Exactly, and the last year of this monarch would be the first year of that monarch. The Chinese have the same thing. They have eras. So it's year 3 of the era of Gaozang of the Tang Empire. That's how they counted this. There was a calendar. There was an ancient calendar was used, but you would be surprised. It was the Seleucid calendar. It was a calendar that was established by the Seleucus I, the Diadochoi sort of ruler that replaced Alexander in Iran.
The Greek rulers.
They use that for certain type of timekeeping. But the regular daily calendar was based on the king's day. There is another one based on a king's rule, and that's the Yazdgirdi calendar, which essentially is 10 years behind the Hijri, the solar Hijri calendar. So In Yazgirdi calendar, it would be 1392 now. But I'm just okay with the Iranian calendar because it goes to the medieval period. It is a solar calendar, and well, okay, yeah, the beginning of it starts with the Hijrah of Muhammad, which majority of Iranians are Muslims, so why not? I don't see a problem with it.
You mentioned solar. Why is it that the Iranian calendar is on a solar system, and when you look around that region, to the east and west, most other calendars are based on a lunar system?
It's a really good question about why, because the Chinese use lunar, the Jews use lunar, and the
Arabs.
Arabs use lunar as well. I don't really know. In the ancient period, both were used simultaneously for different purposes. Solar calendar is obviously coming from Babylonia, ancient Babylonia. They
Okay.
use this. So the whole setting of the solar calendar is really an ancient Babylonian thing. And it was always used. I don't really have a very good reason. What we know as the Zoroastrian calendar, how ancient it is and when exactly they came up with it, I don't really have a very clear opinion on that. But that's also solar. But lunar was used simultaneously. So lunar calendar wasn't unknown. Somehow the way we have it now, which is happening really in the 11th, 12th century, is for the organization of agriculture and for tax purposes. It's because the biggest thing about the area that Iran and the area around it is the agriculture and the control of water and growing of things.
You mean
And
when you say the way we have it now, you mean the solar system?
the solar system, yeah. So
Okay.
the solar system is a lot more useful for agricultural activity. At least in the 11th, 12th century, when they're setting it up, that's mostly the reason. But I really don't know why necessarily lunars didn't take on as much. For most of Iranian history after Islam, it did. After all,
Yeah. They use
until
dual.
1906, that's what we were using anyway. So we reintroduced it. But just solar calendar has a longer history within the Iranian world, I guess.
Interesting. Before we go to the next segment, I just wanted a quick clarification on something. We've used the word ancient, and there's the term antiquity.
Yeah.
They're not interchangeable. They mean different eras. Do I have that correctly?
No, not necessarily. We are talking about the same thing.
We are?
There is a problem. Both of these terms are really created for European history. Terms such as ancient or antique, and then now late antique, which is becoming common, and medieval and pre-modern and early modern and modern. These are really for European history, set up to describe really what 19th century Europeans saw as their ancient or antiquity, which is Greece and Rome, medieval Europe, and then modern. It doesn't necessarily fit everywhere. We just conventionally use it. We just tend to think of everything before 600 BC as ancient, antique, and then medieval, and then modern. But yeah, they are largely interchangeable.
Interesting. We'll be back after a short break to talk about a second Persian empire, one that changed world history in a significant and lasting way. We'll be right back. Dr. Rezakhani, I'm going to dive into this segment by asking you this. What is Iran Shah? Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yes.
So what is that term?
Well, Iran Shah specifically is the term that late Sasanian and early Islamic sources talking about late Sasanian period in Middle Persian, in the language of the Sasanians, used to describe the empire. So, it's made up of the word Iran, which is, as I said, is the plural of air, and Shahr here, which Persian speaker might recognize that the modern term for a city, but it really means a domain. It actually comes from the same root that the word Shah comes from. So it's the domain, it's the expanse. So it expands or the domain of the people of air. The term gets used in the late Sasanian and early Islamic period to describe the sort of the world of the Sasanian Empire. There is a lot of detail and there's a lot of discussion that we haven't settled yet about how this term was understood and how it was understood from, transposing mythological geography and physical geography of the land, which requires a whole lot of explanation. But generally, that's it. We could, for lack of a better term, we could say that Iran Shahr, at least in the late antique, early Islamic period, equals the Sasanian territories.
Was there a reason that the term Iran Shahr was used in the Sasanian era versus prior empires such as the Achaemenid Persian Empire? What I'm trying to get at, let me just ask it this way. Did the concept of Iran, is that something that the Sasanian Empire was promoting or establishing versus the prior large Persian Empire, the Achaemenid Empire? Or am I reading too much into this, Dr. Rezakhani?
No, you're not. You are putting your finger rather on a very, very thorny issue. And this issue of terminology and labels, which we often take very for granted. Well, you have to notice, Iran Shahr is not even used during the Sasanian period that extensively, at least in the first centuries. You have to notice that the first rulers of this land, Sasanian rulers of this land, they are calling themselves Shahanshah Iran and then Shahanshah Iran o an Iran. Yani it means the king of kings of the Iran, however you want to see that. You want to see that as a indicative of land, or Iran in the sense of people of air, whatever that means, which we should get into when we get to Zoroastrianism. And what is not Iran, what is not air, or what is not Iran. So early on the coins of Ardashir I, Shapur I is king of kings of Iran. Then on the inscription of Shapur I, and then on the coins of his son Hormuz I, the word king of kings of Iran and non-Iran is added. And then we start progressing, and then that falls out. And that probably has something to do with the changing understanding of geography and the population. So again, I have certain ideas about it, and my ideas are my own. There is no necessarily grand agreement on this. So even the word Iran Shahr, you could say, is a mid to late Sasanian invention. And we really have it from the Pahlavi documents that occur in the early Islamic period, in a sense. So that is important. Why didn't the Achaemenids have something like this? Or the Parthians, our Sassanids have this? I would imagine there's, again, not a good answer to this, but I think it has to do with an understanding of your own legitimacy within not only territorial and geographical boundaries, but within a sort of a cosmic understanding. And I would say the later Sasanians are slowly moving towards understanding their territory, the area that they actually rule, in physical terms, and trying to define it in physical terms, rather than thinking of it as a sort of a cosmic name, or a name that is setting out us versus them. So more a sort of
inclusive,
more inclusive and exclusive, more trying to define who is us and who is not us, in a sense.
Okay.
And then it becomes a territory. It really becomes a territory the way Sasanians recognize.
So let me try to say to explain for myself what you just shared with me, and tell me if I have it correctly. In the early centuries of the Sasanian Empire, they used the term King of Kings of Iran and an Iran. That means Iran and those outside of Iran, with an E. But then this evolved over the centuries. For our audience, the Sasanian Empire, I think, lasted for about 450 or so years, 4 centuries.
430 years, yeah.
Yeah. That term evolved into Iran Shah, that they really gave it some definition. So in the last segment, we talked about, I think we mentioned this, that Sasanians, the family, the royal family itself, was Persian, right?
Yeah.
So does that make Sasanians, and you and I touched on this during the break, Dr. Rezakhani, does that make the Sasanians the second Persian Empire? The first being the one that was founded by Cyrus the Great and ultimately defeated by Alexander the Great?
Specifically, if you want to be nitty gritty and get to the actual exact point, yes, they both came from the province of Persia. They came both from the province of Fars, from the province of Persis during the Arsacid and Seleucid period. So in that sense, yes, they are both coming from the same province. Whether they are sharing the same ethnicity, I would step back from defining that. This term, Second Persian Empire for Sasanians, is a largely 19th century British creation. That comes from this grand book that was written, or a series of books that was written about the ancient world. And the term Second Persian Empire came out largely in opposition to the Arsacid Empire, which was called the Parthian Empire, because the Arsacid family came from Parthia, which is in northeastern part of the land. So it is in the province, it is in modern province of Khorasan and on the borderland of Afghanistan, Turkmenistan.
So was the Parthian Empire an Iranian empire?
Yes, because in a sense, they have all the characteristics that we want to call an Iranian empire. They speak an Iranian language. If we go again to the 19th century thing, they are an Iranian people. They were even accused, whether correctly or not, is a matter of our Sassanid history is quite a problematic thing. They were even accused of being anti-Hellenistic, being the Iranians who are pushing out the Hellenes. So
I've read that, yeah.
In this fight, which I disagree, by the way, I think Hellenism is not a foreign element in Iranian history. It becomes a foreign element because of, again, 19th century Europeans defining Greeks as their ancestors and owning. I always use this joke. My uncle actually is called Plato, Aflatun, and I went to school.
What a great name!
Yeah, and my best friend in school was called Aristotle. So you just find an English person whose uncle is called Plato and who went to school with Aristotle. The Greek culture is as much sort of part of this culture as it is. But again, in 19th century, Greece becomes the chosen ancestor of the European colonialized mindset, and then it becomes, again, so Parthians, even in the 19th century history writing, become the great opponents of the Greeks. So yes, Parthians are certainly Iranian. So it's understood that Achaemenids, Persian Achaemenids, Parthian Arsacids, and Persians Sasanians are these grand pre-Islamic dynasties of Iran. So the Second Persian Empire is Persian as opposed to the Parthians, not Persian as opposed to Iranians, and that the rest weren't Iranians. Parthians are Iranian too.
That's a good way. That's a good way of drawing a contrast for me to understand. So we're talking about Sasanians in this segment. How important was this empire in its own time?
In its own time, very. In its own time, I would say of course, you are talking about 430 years of history. So, it's very hard to define something that has lasted that long. Imagine we're talking about something that is lasting from almost Queen Elizabeth I to now. This is a rather daunting sort of stretch of time. They are, however, quite important. At no point in their history they lose their importance in West and Central Asia and get reduced to something insignificant. Of course, they fluctuate. Early on in the 3rd century, they have a growth burst, which takes them from really what is today Afghanistan all the way to what is today borders of today Syria, which becomes more or less their core territory. So that Iran Shah really starts defining slowly this territory from Afghanistan to the borders of Syria. They do in the late 5th century, they lose the eastern part of their territories to this new Central Asian power of the Hephthalites. But that doesn't really last that long. They do sort of recover part of it in the 6th century. And then in the 7th century, under the rule of what I consider their greatest emperor, Khosrow II, they conquer all of Syria, Palestine, Anatolia, and Egypt. And they become the most important really power for a short period of time. And I don't think the period is really that short, because I think there is a continuity to it that we don't consider. But anyway, they are never an insignificant empire. They are economically quite important.
How so?
Well, they are both in production economy. Sasanians generally invested both the Central Empire through direct investment and also through various administrative and taxation reforms, really encourages settlements, development of land, mining, introduction of new crops, which are cash crops often, and then there's a whole lot of trading, encouragement of trade. So we have that, for example, the hinterland of Baghdad, as it's called by one of the archaeologists, the northern parts of Mesopotamia, the intensity of settlement in the late Sasanian period is not met until the modern times. So
oh, wow.
In the 6th and 7th century, the upper part of Mesopotamia is the most intense settlement that it has had in its history until modern times. And for example, in the Indian Ocean trade, it seems that the Persian traders, whatever the traders that are subject to the Sasanians, are controlling really all of the port trade on the western coast of India, and they are the ones who are the main conduits for transfer of goods that comes from East Asia to western part of the Indian Ocean. They're they are the most important players in the system. So economically, socially, politically, and militarily, they're quite important. Yeah.
How about their soft power? You know how the United States has soft power and China is trying to develop a soft power. How about that, where they...
In imperial sense, that's really hard to say, because in empires don't have clear boundaries the way we think of countries, right?
Yeah.
So having influence, having soft power influence is a hard thing to really say how far it expands. We know that this world has a continuous or lasting effect in many senses. Many of the things that we recognize let's say this, many of the things that we recognize in the medieval and modern period as Iranian are really established in the Sasanian period, right? So anything from that Nowruz question that you asked and the traditions associated with it, to, I don't know, for me, I like coins. So for me, one of the most interesting things is that, still in the Middle East, you have two sorts of main names for coins, for money. One of them is dinar, which comes from Latin denarius, and one of them is dirham, which comes from Sasanian money, dirham. Yes, originally come from Greek drachma, which was the currency of Athens, and that's how it came. But it spreads because of the Sasanians. The word dirham spreads because of Sasanians. And really, the Sasanian coinage is the basis of Islamic silver coinage all through the Middle Ages. Recently, they recently found Sasanian coins in Britain. A couple of them near Manchester in Britain, they were Sasanian coins found. So like this entire thing. So they are very influential in many senses of the word. Their soft power is lasting rather than contemporaneously. We could study how far and whether they actually had any plans. Yes, in some senses, you could say, for example, later Sasanian emperors seem to be very much trying to extend their soft power by supporting certain communities of Eastern Christians in Syria, to trying to buy, for example, the Eastern Syriac churches sort of support against the Byzantines, right? How far that goes, I don't know. But is that really, can you really call that a soft power? Because it is within military sense.
Yeah.
We have several references to Jewish populations being naturally, sort of, for various reasons, looking towards the Sasanian Empire. Other than the fact that the biggest part of the Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud, is really written under the Sasanian control in Mesopotamia, you have references to various Jewish characters who end up being pro-Sasanians. So, but it's really hard to say what the soft power for an empire.
Yeah.
Because in a sense, an empire is all soft power.
An empire is all soft power. That's very interesting. We'll be back after a short break to talk about the fall of the Sasanian Empire and the rise of Islam.